NCOC, one of the largest and most complex projects in the world. Safe and steady production and export since 2016. Extreme weather conditions. Sensitive environment. Ice movement and formation of hummocks. Annual environmental surveys. In 1998 to 2020, completed 222 projects for about $800 million US. In 2004 to 2020, $15.5 billion US spent on local goods, works, and services.
China National Petroleum Corporation, CNPC, is the world's third largest oil company operating in 37 countries. The Belt and Road Initiative unlocks new opportunities for mutually beneficial cooperation among all Central Asian countries. In Kazakhstan, we invested $45 billion in production, paid $50 billion in taxes, and contributed $400 million to social projects. 30,000 Kazakhstanis work in our dedicated team. CNPC in Kazakhstan, 24 years together.
We know it's going to take many forms of energy to meet the world's needs while creating a cleaner future for all. At Chevron, we're lowering the carbon emissions intensity of our operations, investing in lower carbon technologies, and exploring renewable fuels of the future. We work hard to care for the homes we love, but it's only human to protect the one we share.
The unique Tengiz-Novorossiysk oil pipeline of the Caspian Pipeline Consortium has been successfully operating on the territory of Kazakhstan and Russia for a quarter of a century. Besides oil transportation, the Caspian Pipeline Consortium actively supports charity projects that help preserve the biodiversity of Kazakhstan. The consortium also demonstrates a high level of social responsibility, supporting talented young people and those who are in need. Caspian Pipeline Consortium, long-standing partnership.
This is the one place we're not afraid to fail. Some of these experiments may not work, but a few might shape the future. Like turning algae into biofuel. New technology for capturing CO2 emissions. And cars twice as efficient as the average car today. Ideas ExxonMobil scientists are working on to make energy go further. No matter how many tries it takes, energy lives here.
The Karachaganak Petroleum Operating Company operates one of the largest oil and gas condensate fields in the world. It is located in Burlin district of West Kazakhstan Oblast. In 2020, Karachaganak produced some 144 million barrels of oil equivalent of stable liquid hydrocarbons, export raw gas and sweet fuel gas. As of today, KPO partners have invested more than $27 billion into the development of the Karachaganak field.
Energy is life. We all need it, and it's a source of progress. So today, to contribute to the sustainable development of the planet facing the climate challenge, we are moving forward, together, towards new energies. Energy is reinventing itself, and this energy journey is ours. Our ambition is to be a world-class player in the energy transition. That is why Total is transforming and becoming Total Energies.
We know it's going to take many forms of energy to meet the world's needs while creating a cleaner future for all. At Chevron, we're lowering the carbon emissions intensity of our operations, investing in lower carbon technologies, and exploring renewable fuels of the future. We work hard to care for the homes we love, but it's only human to protect the one we share. We know it's going to take many forms of energy to meet the world's needs while creating a cleaner future for all. At Chevron, we're lowering the carbon emissions intensity of our operations, investing in lower carbon technologies, and exploring renewable fuels of the future. We work hard to care for the homes we love, but it's only human to protect the one we share.
NCOC, one of the largest and most complex projects in the world. Safe and steady production and export since 2016. Extreme weather conditions, sensitive environment, ice movement and formation of hummocks. Annual environmental surveys. In 1998 to 2020, completed 222 projects for about $800 million. In 2004 to 2020, $15.5 billion spent on local goods, works, and services.
China National Petroleum Corporation, CNPC, is the world's third largest oil company operating in 37 countries. The Belt and Road Initiative unlocks new opportunities for mutually beneficial cooperation among all Central Asian countries. In Kazakhstan, we invested $45 billion in production, paid $50 billion in taxes, and contributed $400 million to social projects. 30,000 Kazakhstanis work in our dedicated team. CNPC in Kazakhstan, 24 years together.
We know it's going to take many forms of energy to meet the world's needs while creating a cleaner future for all. At Chevron, we're lowering the carbon emissions intensity of our operations, investing in lower carbon technologies, and exploring renewable fuels of the future. We work hard to care for the homes we love, but it's only human to protect the one we share.
The unique Tengiz-Novorossiysk oil pipeline of the Caspian Pipeline Consortium has been successfully operating on the territory of Kazakhstan and Russia for a quarter of a century. Besides oil transportation, the Caspian Pipeline Consortium actively supports charity projects that help preserve the biodiversity of Kazakhstan. The consortium also demonstrates a high level of social responsibility, supporting talented young people and those who are in need. Caspian Pipeline Consortium, long-standing partnership.
This is the one place we're not afraid to fail. Some of these experiments may not work. But a few might shape the future. Like turning algae into biofuel. New technology for capturing CO2 emissions. And cars twice as efficient as the average car today. Ideas ExxonMobil scientists are working on to make energy go further. No matter how many tries it takes. Energy lives here.
The Karachiganak Petroleum Operating Company operates one of the largest oil and gas condensate fields in the world. It is located in Burlin district of West Kazakhstan Oblast. In 2020, Karachiganak produced some 144 million barrels of oil equivalent of stable liquid hydrocarbons, export raw gas and sweet fuel gas. As of today, KPO partners have invested more than $27 billion into the development of the Karachiganak field.
Energy is life. We all need it, and it's a source of progress. So today, to contribute to the sustainable development of the planet facing the climate challenge, we are moving forward, together, towards new energies. Energy is reinventing itself, and this energy journey is ours. Our ambition is to be a world-class player in the energy transition. That is why Total is transforming and becoming Total Energies.
We know it's going to take many forms of energy to meet the world's needs while creating a cleaner future for all. At Chevron, we're lowering the carbon emissions intensity of our operations, investing in lower carbon technologies, and exploring renewable fuels of the future. We work hard to care for the homes we love, but it's only human to protect the one we share. We know it's going to take many forms of energy to meet the world's needs while creating a cleaner future for all. At Chevron, we're lowering the carbon emissions intensity of our operations, investing in lower carbon technologies, and exploring renewable fuels of the future. We work hard to care for the homes we love, but it's only human to protect the one we share.
Уважаемые
Distinguished colleagues, dear ladies and gentlemen, greetings. Welcome you all, those who are here offline, those who have joined us online on the presentation of the Fifth National Report. So this report we do the fifth time since 2013. 2020 is a very important and specific year for all of us because of pandemic COVID-19 distribution, and it had great changes to the World Economy Association, KAZENERGY, realizing the specific actuality of all the serious changes caused not only by pandemic but by the political solutions of key countries about necessity of accelerating the transfer to the low carbon development, has made the decision of having the analysis and identifying the perspectives of development. The report has become the significant event for the all expertise society and gives the orientation for the further development of energy sphere in the context of the world economy. And the outcomes and recommendations and results based on it will be demanded and important in making the decisions which are not easy, which are not simple. This fifth report is prepared with Kazakhstani experts and specialties, and especially important this year, anniversary year, 30th anniversary of the independence of the country. In this report, we focus our attention at the new energetic landscape after all these changes and challenges of 2020 and its impact on this sphere, including such key questions are considered as analysis of world economy and energy markets in 2020, including the forecasts of the world fuel and energy balance during the period till up to 2050. And the world ecological climate politics of Kazakhstan and the policy of Kazakhstan in particular, analysis of global energy transfer, and many other questions. I would like to express the gratitude to all state authorities, associations, especially to the Ministry of Energy, Ministry of Ecology, Geology, and Natural Resources for the support during the preparation of this report. The main expert in the process of work on this national energy report is IHS Markit, which is well known in expertise world and expert world, and it has provided great results during our previous collaborative and joint work. The success of preparation of this report is connected with the participation of Daniel Yergin, Vice President of IHS Markit. Everybody knows him really well, who was in Kazakhstan. He is a recognized authority representative of national policy and economy. You know really well that for his book, World History of Struggle for Oil, Money and Power, has become the bestseller, and it was translated into 17 languages. Daniel Yergin has received the Pulitzer Award. So I would like to give the floor to Mr. Daniel Yergin, Vice President of IHS Markit. Please, the floor is yours. And
work on the National Energy Report 2021 for Kazakhstan. This marks our fourth edition of the significant and groundbreaking report covering the importance, the diversity, the successes, and the challenges of Kazakhstan's energy sector. This year also marks 30 years of national independence, and we congratulate Kazakhstan on this historic anniversary. This report marks an important shift for Kazakhstan, one in which the country and the world at large more directly address climate change and the implications of a global energy transition targeted towards reducing greenhouse gas emissions. Further, we deliver this new report in the later stages of what is still an ongoing global pandemic from COVID-19, a pandemic that resulted in a broad economic contraction. And although energy demand is expected to recover to 2019 levels next year and grow at a slow or moderate rate thereafter, the energy mix will increasingly include renewables and reflecting a quickening pace of decarbonization worldwide in pursuit of net zero carbon compared to our outlook prior to the onset of the pandemic. There are a number of implications for Kazakhstan that are highlighted in the National Energy Report 2021. Although Kazakhstan's economy has experienced considerable development and some diversification in the 3 decades since independence, hydrocarbons and energy sources and other energy sources still remain central to the national economy. The oil and gas industries alone, together with related sectors, contribute 17% of the country's GDP in 2020, with oil accounting for the bulk of Kazakh export earnings and constituting the primary source of the government's budgetary revenues. The development of the oil and gas industry has been a source of strength, generating economic activity, employment, and revenues that have been crucial since 1991 in solidifying Kazakhstan's independence as a nation and delivering increasingly high incomes and standards of living for its people. It has also fortified Kazakhstan's relations with its neighbors and established the country as a major force in the global oil industry and a significant participant in global markets and the world community and in global affairs. But this also increases the national economy's vulnerability to external shocks. This was painfully driven home in 2020 by the COVID-19 pandemic. As world liquids demand fell to nearly 11%, Kazakhstan entered its deepest recession in 2 decades. Yet a paradox of sorts emerges. Given the importance of the energy sector within Kazakhstan's economy, revenues from exports of hydrocarbon and other energy resources will be essential for economic diversification and for funding the country's ongoing transition to a lower carbon economy in the future. But as the report highlights, international markets for hydrocarbons will shift in meaningful ways as the global energy transition continues. And it is clear that Kazakhstan will face increased competition from scarce foreign capital worldwide, including from other major hydrocarbon producers. Investor companies will still compete for new opportunities, but they are being more selective with new projects, increasing the competition among resource-holding countries for available investment. It will be important in this emerging environment for Kazakhstan's policymakers to take steps to enlighten fiscal and other policies to demonstrate that they are holders of advantaged or resilient resources, oil and gas supplies that can be developed, produced, and delivered at increasingly low cost and with a low carbon footprint, and at the same time with regulatory certainty and timely decision-making. These will be key criteria on which international companies will make their investment decisions. Despite the heightened concern, fruitful new mechanisms for international collaboration have emerged in response to the pandemic. The April 2020 OPEC Plus mega deal to curtail output in response to the world demand collapse amounted to the largest ever organized crude oil production cut, and to this point has been successful in stabilizing global oil markets, pulling world oil prices back from those very low levels, and with that, export revenues for oil exporters. Kazakhstan has played a major role in the group's efforts. Another area of broad cooperation is in the energy space is the pending formation of single markets within the Eurasian Economic Union for oil and oil products, natural gas, and electric power. Integration will bring new benefits and opportunities, but will also require adjustments. And then, of course, there's Kazakhstan's ongoing engagement and discussion of global climate policy, such as the upcoming 26th UN COP meeting, also known as the Glasgow Summit. The signs of a changing global business environment in the energy industries were already evident in the previous reports we worked on. when we observed that international oil and gas companies had shifted their focus from growing the size of their reserves increasingly towards cost efficiency, embracing powerful technological innovations to cut costs and boost production. We also noted that some oil and gas majors were already moving in the direction of becoming more diversified energy companies, branching out into green activities of one kind or another, including renewable energy, and also into carbon capture and storage, and even into electricity and natural gas distribution. COVID-19 has accelerated these trends, rapidly evolving national climate policies and growing pressures, not only from governments, but also investors, climate activists, and the general public are influencing the strategies and plans of energy companies and the broader business community worldwide. All are seeking decarbonization, partly by pushing for long-term targets for company operations and products. This does not mean that carbon products will not be important for the future. They will. Undoubtedly, they will continue to play a major role in the world economy for the foreseeable future into 2050 and beyond. But the focus will increasingly be on reducing their climate impact and increasing efficiency of consumption. That means more emphasis on carbon capture and offsets. One of the key themes we emphasized in our previous report was a precarious balance between Kazakh government's efforts to maintain low electricity, natural gas, and refined prices for Kazakh consumers, understandably, and the need to devise policy to incentivize production, processing, and distribution of these resources. This is partly to generate the revenues necessary to finance reinvestment in the energy sector. This challenge remains a theme in this current volume, but it is now compounded by the need to develop energy resources in a way that reflects full awareness of climate issues. Therefore, a key theme in this report is a discussion of best available technologies in a world practice that can be applied to reduce the environmental impacts of energy production and consumption, and a general assessment of their economic feasibility within Kazakhstan. We present the National Energy Report 2021 at this key stage in the development of Kazakhstan's energy sector with the same sense of optimism and purpose as our first report issued back in 2015. The world has changed a lot since then. Our goal is to contribute to an ongoing process of understanding and with it decision-making and policy formation that will enable Kazakhstan to meet its energy and environmental challenges while promoting the economic and social well-being of its people. Thank you.
Mr. Yergin, thank you very much for your presentation. I wanted to thank you for continuous support of our thoughts and our initiatives. We appreciate it, and we appreciate your analytical activity that involves a lot of experts, a lot of concerned parties. IHS Markit is a leading provider of analytical research in the sphere of climate, business climate, energy sector, international politics, and economics. So I wanted to give the floor to Mr. Matthew Sagers, Managing Director on Economy and Energy, Eurasia, Head of Research in Russia and Caspian region, for him to explain his vision. Please.
It is my great honor today to present the key findings of our fourth National Energy Report for Kazakhstan. And just in case you can't remember, I thought I would give you a few ideas about what the key purposes of this document is. The document is aimed at providing an analytical, internal, consistent overview of the major sectors. We want to address the key questions facing Kazakhstan's energy sector. And of course, what we want to do is also update the data that we've been doing for the past 4 times. And of course, the National Energy Report 2021 is intended for Kazakhstan's decision makers, business leaders, potential investors, thought leaders, and of course, the general public as well. Now, why does anybody really care about the energy sector in Kazakhstan? Well, the reason is pretty simple. It's pretty important overall in terms of the economy. It accounts for somewhere between 20 and 25% of the economy in any given year. In 2020, it did fall down to 17%, driven by lower oil prices and suppressed oil production. But that's still a very sizable share. And it's, like I said, it's simply been running north of 20, south of 2025. It's very important in terms of overall budget revenues for the economy. And as you saw with those revenues depressed in 2020, the government budget went into deficit. And of course, it's very important in terms of total export earnings as well, down to about 58% in 2020, down from 2/3 in 2019. What we're going to do today is just simply talk a little bit about the energy sector. We'll talk a little bit about global energy trends and the energy transition issues in Kazakhstan. And then we just simply want to do an overview of the major sectors: oil, gas, coal, uranium. Electric power is so important, it has its own section, and that will be coming just a little bit later, right after me. But as we look at global energy trends and the energy transition, it's just simply a key story here. It represents a major change in 2020, moving the energy transition beyond slow motion to a much faster rate of change. There's a number of reasons for that. First and foremost was the sharp fall in fossil fuel demand with the pandemic. We also see a number of other factors as well. Money has begun moving away from the sector. Governments are promoting green plans that in fact have actually translated into a number of net zero pledges by countries that continue to proliferate that are regulating carbon. And of course, at the same time, we see something that's called E-Day. This is where there's no longer going to be any green premium for the green options, cars, electricity, cement. But at the moment, there is still a premium that has to be paid for those green options. But nonetheless, it's coming up in terms of the near future here. Just to remind everybody what the energy transition is, it is a process that's likely going to be fairly protracted of moving to a lower carbon world to combat global climate change stemming from emissions of greenhouse gases. And the reason that energy sector is so important in this is because energy use accounts for something like 90% of all CO2 emissions globally. So the sector is under considerable pressure to ease the climate crisis. And of course, nowadays with this going on, the energy transition is just simply now part and parcel of any kind of discussion of the energy sectors as part of the context, as part of the lexicon, and so forth. But the pace of the energy transition is going to be determined by government policies, but we also see a lot of pressure now emerging from financial institutions, the economics involved, the technological advances, and of course the public as well here. There's been a growing trend for national regulation of carbon emissions, and with it, increased concern from carbon leakage, of how you deal with carbon moving back and forth across countries. And the foremost example of this, we've got a lot of different countries, as you can see, that are doing different things about regulating national carbon. But the foremost example of a cross-border example is Europe's CBAM, the cross-border carbon adjustment mechanism. And what this is that CBAM proposes to be an import duty that's paid to the price of carbon allowances on Europe's trading scheme. As it's first going to be rolled out, it's going to apply to only a small number of industries. And so a lot of people around the world that produce a lot of carbon or export fuels and so forth, everyone was holding their breath, wondering what this was going to be, but it ended up being kind of CBAM light. Coverage is limited to a relatively small number of industries: steel, aluminum, cement, fertilizers, electricity. It doesn't include fuels like crude oil, natural gas, coal, or even refined products and petrochemicals. They're not in. The mechanism is designed to protect domestic producers from lower cost or carbon intensive imports. This is what we mean by carbon leakage across. And the idea here is that Europe uses its major trading partner role to advance a decarbonization in countries sort of beyond its borders. As we look at this first iteration of CBAM, the reason we call it CBAM light was because if we look at Kazakhstan's exports to Europe of CBAM listed goods, they amounted to only about $193 million in 2019 and 20. This represent, only about 0.3 to 0.4% of total annual export earnings. So it's not going to have a major impact in this first go around. But of course, the idea is that eventually it will be extended, or maybe other instruments will be used and so forth. But this is kind of where we are now today. In terms of looking at the longer term energy transition, as we change from fossil fuels over to renewables and low carbon sources of energy, I just simply want to point out that in our scenarios, our base case called inflections, we still see oil and gas being very important, still in 2050s. We see renewables growing like crazy, but on the other hand, we still see oil and gas accounting for about half of global energy demand in 2050. Oil at about 25, so its share drops, the share of gas goes up. And the other thing that I want to remind you of in terms of looking at this is not some kind of top-down scenario. This stuff comes from looking at country by country, sector by sector, building up this overall view and thinking about a lot of the logistical issues and supply chains and so forth. How fast can you roll out renewables, or how fast can you change over to electric cars and all these other sort of things? And we end up taking the view that there's still a lot of room for oil and gas in the world. This isn't going to change overnight. And the reason we call it basically kind of a protracted change. And as I said before, despite a lot of contrary views, we believe that oil is going to play a key role during the energy transition. In fact, we see total liquids demand still rising in non-OECD countries during this period of time. There's quite a bit of differentiation from region to region, but we also still say even Europe, the country that is most advanced in terms of its decarbonization policies, we still say even Europe is still going to consume quite a bit of oil. Now, the production is going to fall more rapidly than consumption, but Europe is still going to be a fairly sizable consumer of oil. Now, what does that mean for Kazakhstan? We'll talk about that in a little bit later, but let me just sort of indicate two other charts here. There are many, many different scenarios of oil demand. You can see the number that's up on there. The red line is our base case. And if you take a look at that base case, inflections, world oil demand simply resets after COVID-19 to a lower level, and it basically resumes its same trajectories it had before. Basically, the underlying drivers all remain the same. Another key thing to think about here, and you can see that the amount of oil used in the world is actually going to be fairly significant still in 2050, although oil demand globally will be declining after the mid-2030s. And if we think about what this means for oil prices, again, the red line up there basically shows our expectations for average annual oil prices longer term. We think they're going to be in about a range of about $60 per barrel approximately that reflect our changed supply and demand conditions. Now, that chart is fairly flat going forward. We still expect that oil price volatility is going to be a key feature of global oil markets. It's just simply how things happen in the real world. But on the other hand, we think that the price cycles will be much shorter duration because of a much larger share of what's called short cycle barrels or responsive barrels in overall supply. In the past, the main driver of this volatility had to do with kind of fairly abrupt and significant changes in demand. Now we see that basically with all these short cycle barrels in, the response can be much more sooner and a little bit more tuned before. So we think that the volatility will still be there, but it will be much shorter. In other words, instead of a price cycle being years in length, it will be months instead, something like that. As we come back and think about a global oil cost curve, the key question that everyone is facing right now, particularly Kazakhstan, is does Kazakhstan have what companies are looking for, which is termed advantage barrels? These are low cost or resilient barrels that can be produced that could allow Kazakhstan to garner an increasing share of lower global oil supply. As we look at the cost curve, most sources of projected incremental crude supply through 2040 have break-even costs that's below about $50 Brent in constant 2020. That's why we're basically thinking about a price forecast that's going to be in the range of $6. But as we look at where Kazakhstan is on that cost curve, Kazakhstan's barrels are not the most expensive in the world to produce. There's a number of countries that are actually higher than that. But the problem for Kazakhstan is that most of its new barrels still lie at the high end of the global cost curve. This is going to be a challenge that we'll come back to a little bit later on in the presentation. As we shift over to look more specifically at energy transition issues in Kazakhstan, the key thing that is looming right now is the INDC commitment, the pledge that they have as part of the Paris Accords of a 15% reduction relative to 1990. Our view is that given its current trajectory, Kazakhstan looks unlikely to achieve this goal. But that is not a foregone conclusion. There's a number of things that can be done to basically see that Kazakhstan does meet that target. But at the moment, we think that the trajectory that Kazakhstan is on is going to be that national greenhouse gas emissions are likely to drift upwards again with economic recovery in the 2020s. A much more concerted effort is needed to reduce this. And of course, what Kazakhstan is now talking about is a little bit more ambitious goal for 2060 of net zero, and that is going to require an even broader based transformation of the entire economy. But the key pathways for decarbonization, we've got them identified here. It's energy efficiency, fossil fuel diversification, electrification, and of course, carbon trading and the voluntary carbon market. I don't think that there's one size that fits all solution. A multitude of different approaches are going to be used, and for Kazakhstan, I think that's certainly true. As we look more specifically at Kazakhstan's total GHG emissions, we see where they were in 2019, and there actually is a very good news here. If you look at 2018 and 2019, there was actually a decline in GHG emissions, and also more than likely 2020 was as well, but the official numbers haven't been compiled yet for that. We can look at what happened in consumption overall. But we still think that barring expeditious and targeted action, Kazakhstan is unlikely to achieve its unconditional Paris climate goal for 2030 of that 15% reduction as we look at it overall. But it's not a foregone conclusion here. One of the instruments that Kazakhstan has rolled out to help it regulate carbon really has not performed very well. The ETS, the carbon trading system. It was relaunched in 2018 and 2020, but as we look at the results, it was fairly lackluster, especially as an instrument for CO2 reduction. It needs a much further fine-tuning for its effectiveness. It needs much careful consideration going into how the initial quotas are set, and then also how do you create a transparent market-based system. As we look at how it worked, we saw that electricity companies were fairly active. The upstream oil and gas operators complied with their quotas. The mining sector was very easy for them to do. It seems like their quotas were not set very rigorously to begin with. And then the midstream operators, the pipeline operators, they were the ones that missed their quotas. And that tells you that probably their quotas were probably set a little bit too low here. But overall, we see very few trades. The carbon price that came out of the system were very, very low. A lot of times they had absolutely no fluctuation, which indicated that these really weren't market driven at all. So we need much greater transparency. We need to basically look at company procurement practices and rules and so forth that would actually create a trading scheme that goes along with this. And one of these things that is a problem here is that the actual emissions of the entities themselves are not publicly accessible. It's hard to create a transparent trading scheme if people don't really have any idea what's going on with any of the individual players. So these are the sort of things that you need to think about in terms of policy change. As we look at our major sectors here in terms of our messages, I think for the oil industry, the one thing that we want to point to is the relatively high upstream oil production costs, including the high government tax take, render producers very vulnerable to low oil price. And it also basically challenges upstream investment longer term. Our conclusion at the moment is that much of Kazakhstan's considerable remaining upstream oil potential may never be developed, not only because of these high upstream costs, but also a much more limited upstream investment appetite among the companies from the ongoing energy transition we've been talking about, and a less attractive business environment than is found in many other hydrocarbon producing countries. So these are the sort of key things that we want to highlight here. This is our measure of overall investment attractiveness for Kazakhstan. This is very critical for attracting upstream investment globally as companies are seeking these advantage barrels. But as we look at the situation for Kazakhstan, its overall performance ended up being pretty middle of the road. It comes in at 52 out of 119 markets overall. And the main factor here is the country's fiscal system. Tax is too high relative to other countries, and it comes in the wrong places. But the question I have for you right now is if companies are really seeking advantage barrels and you're only middle of the road, this is probably not a very good thing right now in terms of what we're looking at. You probably need to be at the top to basically show companies that you do have those advantage barrels. Now, again, the story is the main problem here is the fiscal system, and there's a number of things that can be done to basically change that. It's a policy-driven environment after all. In terms of our forecast, we basically see national production reaching a maximum of only about 102 million metric tons now. This is much lower than any of our previous ones. And it has to do with this whole malaise we've been talking about, falling to about 73 million tons in 2050. The main drivers here are basically the big three. We basically see Tengiz, Kashagan. They're the main factors that drive production upwards in the 2020s and 2030s. We basically Kazmunaigaz as legacy assets. We expect them to continue to decline, but we do expect an attenuated decline as implementation of new technologies for their mature fields basically rolls out. Smaller independent producers clearly could play a much greater role, but realization of this potential depends on greatly improved business conditions for them. So therefore, we end up being kind of fairly middle of the road in terms of how we see these guys developing. A key factor in 2020 was the much greater role that CIS and Kazakhstan played in the OPEC 2020 mega deal, much larger share. But at the same time, we basically see that compliance was not really right on target all the time. And there's not too much surprise about that because almost all the countries had a very significant problem with compliance, particularly after the initial couple of months. But as we look at Kazakhstan, its compliance varied from about 59% to 189%, but that 189% was basically in August that had to do with maintenance at Tengiz that basically pulled production down and brought it under the quota. And as we looked at the previous years, the only time when Kazakhstan was really 100% compliant was really when maintenance was happening at one of the big three. But nonetheless, this has been a very successful international cooperation for Kazakhstan. This mega deal basically had a major role in basically stabilizing the global oil market and driving prices upwards. Another thing that we wanted to highlight, and it's not anything that we haven't done before, is basically with that production profile we talked about and basically rising consumption inside the country. We don't think that Kazakhstan is going to automatically change over and become electric car driven overnight, even though the rail system is actually fairly electrified. We still see oil demand rising up, and that means that a larger share of overall output is going to be going into the refineries and into the domestic market. This means that domestic prices are going to have to rise to ensure that the domestic market gets the oil that it needs. Because what you've got going on is you've got a contraction of KNG's legacy upstream operations. That's basically what feeds the refineries at the moment. And also with the imperatives of the integration with the Eurasian common market, it means that you're going to have higher prices. They're going to have to be liberalized. At the moment, Kazakhstan still has the lowest gas, lean, and diesel prices in all of the Eurasian Economic Union. And that basically is not going to bode very well when integration takes place. In terms of Kazakhstan's natural gas industry, again, we can highlight a number of accomplishments and also a couple of challenges. On the accomplishment sides, we see that the production has been rising very rapidly. But I wanted to remind you that natural gas is primarily produced as a byproduct of oil production. There's high reinjection needs and low domestic gas prices basically limit commercial gas availability. And for this chart, I wanted to basically just simply highlight one particular item about the differences between the IHS Markit and the forecast that comes from the Energy Ministry. They have identified on the production side a key source of new gas, which is just simply called new gas sources on there in the 2020s. And that's basically the difference between the two. Otherwise, we basically see a very similar picture of a fairly low rise in commercial gas production. At the same time, gasification has been a strategic priority for Kazakhstan. There's been a lot of investment, and this has actually been very, very successful. We see that Kazakhstan's level of gasification has risen tremendously. Kazakhstan is on track to achieve its goals that established back in 2015, where it wanted to have 56% of its population to have access to pipe gas by 2030. A lot of this is done with some of the new pipelines like Saryarka and so forth that have been happening that now will make gas available basically in almost all of Kazakhstan's oblasts. If you go back a few years, only 10 out of the 14 of Kazakhstan's provinces had pipe gas available. But at the same time, the success in gasification means that domestic consumption is going to grow. And as domestic consumption grows, we see that a tightening gas balance presents a very difficult choice for Kazakhstan between exports and domestic deliveries. We think that demand is going to drift upwards to about 30 BCM by 2030. This constraint on commercial supply means that Kazakhstan is going to have to basically cut back its exports, which are very, very important for KTG. And we see Kazakhstan actually shifting from a net exporter to a net importer in the 2050s. There's another difference that I just wanted to highlight in terms of the differences between the IHS forecast and the Ministry of Energy forecast. The Ministry of Energy forecast basically sees gas in the form of methane in petrochemicals as being a major growth driver. We do not. We basically say, yes, Kazakhstan is going to develop into a petchem operation that's going to be based upon NGLs rather than methane. We see the main consumption drivers of power generation and the residential sector. As we look at coal, again, the accomplishments are that Kazakhstan is a major world-class coal producer. It's very inexpensive to produce. It's a big portion of the overall economy. And also, we don't want to dismiss the fact that coal mining has introduced a number of measures to mitigate local environmental damage, dust, particulate matter, and so forth. But on the other hand, there does remain a lot of room for improvement through the introduction of best available technologies that's being rolled out through the new Eco Code. In terms of challenges, we basically see coal as being central in the problem of GHG emissions. Coal accounted for 57% of the country's primary energy consumption in 2020, and reducing dependence upon coal is going to become critical in managing those GHG emissions. This is basically our forecasts looking out here. We still see coal remaining a very important energy source for Kazakhstan, particularly in power generation. Its share is going to diminish from 57 to about 36%. But on the other hand, we don't see it becoming zeroed out during this period of time. Kazakhstan has still not developed any kind of a broader plan aimed at phasing out coal as part of the energy transition or the new goals for net zero and so forth. That's still yet to be formulated. But on the other hand, we still see coal remaining a very important feature in the domestic economy. Kazakhstan's uranium industry is also a world-class operation. Kazakhstan accounts for a very large percentage. It's the largest world oil producer of uranium. And it did pull back a little bit in terms of 2019 and 2020 because of lower demand. But basically, Kazakhstan remains the world leading producer of uranium, and it produces it with a very environmental friendly technique, the in situ leaching. and it comes at very, very low cost in terms of the overall total. Now, one of the things that Kazakhstan is thinking about is basically moving into other parts of the nuclear fuel value chain. But it sees this as not really economically driven. It sees mining as to remain the most attractive segment. But on the other hand, it does see other parts of the nuclear fuel value chain to offer flexibility and a little bit of differentiation to its consumers. So these are the major outcomes or key findings of our overall report. And I just simply wanted to just sort of give them to you here at the end as well. Although Kazakhstan's GHG emissions declined in 2019 and probably in 2020, they probably are going to drift upwards in the 2020s unless there is some kind of major action taken. The key things to think about in terms of achieving that Paris goal is gasification, the rollout of renewables, energy efficiency improvements, and also GHG emissions from other parts of the economy. Industrial processes, agriculture, land use, and waste are also going to have to decline substantially. It can't just be the energy sector alone. As we look at how to achieve this as well, Kazakhstan's trading scheme for carbon has got to be reformed to create a functional market with much greater transparency so it can function as a key part of achieving that goal. Of course, at the same time, Kazakhstan should continue to improve the investment climate in upstream hydrocarbons, as oil companies are now pursuing only selected investment opportunities that basically offer these so-called advantage barrels. And I think that for Kazakhstan, the challenge is, can they basically demonstrate that they have advantage barrels that can attract that kind of investment? And of course, more broadly, Kazakhstan should work to improve the overall investment conditions across the energy sector. And I think especially in electricity that you're going to hear about next. And the reason is because just simply this transformation is just simply going to require a lot of investment. Clearly, the government can't do it all, and it's going to have to support private sector investment across all areas of the energy transition. With that, let me close and turn the time over to our next participant.
Спасибо. Спасибо.
Thank you very much for interesting presentation, for your speech, for your personal contribution into today's session. Dear colleagues, I've already said that a lot of experts took part in the preparation of today's presentations, and one company that contributed into the preparation of this report was SEEPX Energy. I want to give the floor to Katya de Vere Walker, director of the company. Please, you are given the floor. Dear colleagues, it is my pleasure to greet you at the KAZENERGY Forum and provide some statistical analysis of the energy sector, as well as highlight a number of topics in the sphere of prospective development of the industry. Slide number 1, key statistics. As of 1 January 21, the capacity of Kazakh electric stations, according to KEGOC, was 23.6 megawatts. We must remember that 80% of generation comes from heat power plants, out of which 69% are driven by coal and gas. I need to emphasize that out of 68 heat stations, 41 are heat power plants that work on electric and heat energy. That is important to take into consideration when we discuss radical changes in energy and when we talk about low carbon development. Nevertheless, the global initiative of energy transition in energy, as well as sustained development, have grown stronger. And that means that Kazakhstan, likewise many other countries with industrial economy, have to design such an approach to energy transition that would ensure energy effectivity, infrastructure accessibility, and social acceptability of all the changes. So Kazakhstan is now performing the step-by-step integration of renewables into traditional schemes, and the additional capacity was 3 gigawatts, and that comes mainly from solar and wind energy. As of the date of publication of our report, in the energy system of Kazakhstan, we have 28, 31, and a number of other various power plants. Taking into consideration the limited infrastructure and the gas generation, the coal generation has decreased from 73 to 69%, but it is more interesting to pay attention to 1990, when the share of coal generation was 80%. We are observing the reduction since that time, and it is necessary to remember that the peculiar thing about this energy, this type of energy, is that almost 60% of generation comes from big industrial groups. They are not only great consumers themselves, they are great manufacturers as well. According to KEGOC, the consumption of electric in Kazakhstan in 2020 totaled 173 billion kilowatt hours, which is 2% more than in 2019, despite the limitations imposed by the pandemic. And the growth in the consumption of electric was fixed in all industrial zones. So you all know that the structure of consumption is changing. 60% stands for electric energy, and some 14% goes for consumption for own needs. So in the country, the consumption of electric energy depends on the industrial growth and on the global tendencies and trends, taking into consideration the export orientation of the country. Today, digital mining is a new industry that ensures additional economic growth in 2020. If we talk about the condition of the main assets, despite some significant investments into the renewal of main assets, particularly heat stations, the share of turbines that were installed until 91 constitute 53%. So today the exploitation of the boiler rooms has exceeded 40 years, and today we are not having enough investments to refurbish and modernize those boilers. As seen from this diagram, the investments were coming in exchange to some tariff changes, and after the changes in tariffs we can see the dramatic reduction. Today the tariffs barely exceed the cost value of electric energy. High losses are being observed in the distribution grids, and the grid is also pretty much obsolete and requires modernization and renovation. Let's take into consideration the territorial vastness and necessity to transmit energy to great distances. Here I show the statistical data showing the losses in the course of energy transfer in the Kazakh territory. But in reality we think those figures are much higher. Digitization of equipment, automation is a means to cut the losses, but I need to highlight that according to our data, KEGOC has access to cheap financing for the modernization of their main assets and digitization, while the distribution companies have limited access to the funds for modernization and for improvement of their operative effectivity. The level of obsolescence of the grid is high. Approximately 65% of the equipment and infrastructure is worn out, and the companies report that every year they have to invest 30% of their revenues into the refurbishment. That raises the question of effectivity at all or imperfection of legislation itself.
Kazakhstan was one of the first countries that started their reform of our electric energetical sector, and this selective approach to reforming, because of several reasons, the process was not finished, and the elements of the market regulating of the sector consequently was replaced by the direct regulating from the government and to governmental authorities. According to the results 2020, we can say that stagnates of all the market of the wholesale market and centralized trades of electricity are minimized. And to create the competitive selection of the capacity, we couldn't achieve that, and balancing market still works the same way. And the improvement of the started processes, like having the auctions, and it was unexpectedly allowed of the strict policy of price regulating, and there were no financial motivational stimulus. So here we're talking about the generation and about the networks itself. About the capacity market, the subsidiaries of coal capacities, instead of creating the energy systems, especially the ones that are facing the energy transfer by means of this capacity markets, there was no opportunity to transfer to the better technologies without forming the improvement. So basically the new code, there were the specific initiatives that were not implemented and embedded into this long-term period. The development of electric network and the development of the energy system is still dictated by the network company KEGOC, that not the independent system operator. And planning the development of the energy systems, they didn't take into consideration all the factors. Regulating the electrification companies does not allow to provide the system and investment to prospective development, but the quality updating the funds and implementing new services. And at the same time, since the beginning of 2020, great pressure on electrical energy regarding the sustainable development, especially after 2015 with this Paris Agreement signing on this net zero, low carbon energy sources. As you can see, the slide shows about 85% GHG emissions in Kazakhstan is about electricity production, and with the capacity of the industry consuming the CO2, especially burning fossil such as coal. Because of the project, this concept and this doctrine of low carbon development, it focuses on decarbonization of the industries which use coal. But we would like to clarify here, because in case of the world scenarios provided in Nuremberg or at the International Energy Agency, this doctrine of this low carbon development, it's just the set of options, not the business plan, where the strategy that electric energy in Kazakhstan follows. So because of this, for Kazakhstan, it becomes really important to identify the targets on electric energy in future and to design the strategy of developing this sphere. So to apply those options that are available, which will be more efficient for Kazakhstan. So how the electric energy will be in 2060 will be identified by the non-functional that will have to be created, and those challenges that we will need to overcome in present time. Based on the aims and targets that are ahead of electric energy and those challenges that we face and we've reflected in the slide and in our work, we have tried to form such ideas, such targets and objectives in electric energy of the future. So the aim is to provide the high quality maneuver and high efficiency that will provide the sustainability of electric and heat supply according to the tempo of development of Kazakhstan, with a low carbon development, providing the fair social energy transition oriented on centered and focused on the consumer. So the end goal regarding the current challenges for Kazakhstan, it will be easier to identify the priority directions for the reforms, financing, and some measures of support. Here we include the perspective, technologies, and decisions that we have discussed in chapter number 6. And based on the challenges and targets, we have the basic direction of the reforms, the designing the system that covers every approach, having the direct connection between the targets establishment and regulating the pricing and low carbon objectives and budget. Despite this fact, we would like to draw your attention to optimize the maneuver and creating the conditions and terms stimulating the large-scale investment transformation of regulating of participants of the sector, generation and the networks and institutions of the market, as well as the impact on the results-oriented, providing some stimuli that are connected to the low-carbon development and decarbonization. Especially, I would like to stop and draw your attention on the mechanism of provision of the stable investment provision. Many of you would notice that something is quite market-like before implementing this mechanism of the unified and joint buyer, and it will help to move this from this dead point. Also, we have prescribed the aspects of the market, regulatory tariffs regulating, financing the sustainability and financial sustainability, balancing market, the market of electric capacity with long-term objectives approved with the targets, establishment with the operators and energy systems, math scheme of selection, and the full way of working and activities of the market. So, of course, it will happen when we answer the question, what is the long-term targets establishment, what's the architecture here, and what are the functionals that will be possible to implement it, and it will be more efficient. Nevertheless, in the context of these proposed targets and development of electric energy, we've considered the scenario regarding hydro energy according to the plan of Ministry of Energy till 2035, and also atomic or nuclear power station 240 megawatts. And we recommend to consider the shortest period and deadlines of atomic energy to add it to the energy balance, taking into consideration that atomic energy, that's the stable source of energy, plus considering the coal stations and on the low carbon development. And we understand about the progress, technological progress that was achieved for the efficiency of these technologies and its safety. So in general, the model proposes the sufficient increase in after 2040, by means of which we can decrease the consumption of energy, keeping the coal generation, as is mentioned in a diagram, growth of which since 2040, it explains with the lack of energy system, of the lack of resources in energy systems. So because of this, we suppose that by 2040, the system of emissions absorption of GHG gases, it will be economically feasible and explained, including the support of an investment from the side of Kazakhstani authorities. The model of usage of industrial energy accumulators. Of course, the strategy of long-term development, the strategy will identify the precise architecture and function of all this energy system and to provide the precise calculations. We wish you all the best, interesting readings and active discussions. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, dear Ekaterina, for your participation and participation of your experts. So, distinguished colleagues, this work wouldn't be possible without support and financial support in particular, support from the side of KAZENERGY Association. So we express the gratitude and recognition to all the companies for your support and participation. Samruk-Energy, one of the companies that regularly supports initiatives of association and participates in its realizations from the position of expert expertise. So please, Mr. Sungat, the floor is yours. I would like to say that Mr. Sungat Kuatovich has to leave the scene because we will be waiting for you in another session in several minutes. So, distinguished colleagues, please allow me to express the gratitude to the Association KAZENERGY for the opportunities to participate in this discussion. In general, as I've mentioned, as a moderator mentioned, that is the report number 5. It is quite important in this difficult conditions that the whole world is in. So this national report, before it was accepted and perceived more like oil and gas direction because it was the basement of economy, and the current situation, this low carbon direction and all the objectives towards this idea, decarbonization and energy sector takes it to the first level. So some aspects I wanted to comment, but as Katerina quite precisely and with detail, she has told everything. And in our report, electro-energy is interesting for us too, section number 6. So the questions of decarbonization, low carbon policy, of course, we have really hot discussions with regarding this with Ministry of Economy, and within the frameworks of that doctrine that is being prepared, different platforms, we discuss it. And we understand that, of course, we need to follow this direction. We need to move in this direction because coal, as a representative of Samruk-Energy, 31% of the production of electricity in the country, in our structure, 90% in our structure, that's coal, and thousands of people who work in the sphere. And we understand that we will have to leave it, and we understand that we are trying to achieve the green economy. You could see all the numbers according to the statistics, 3% of 15% in 2013. We think that we cannot refuse and reject coal now. Your analytics, of course, proves this position that by 2050 coal will be there for sure, but we believe in new technologies, and personally myself, I believe that during 2030 we will have such technologies that probably we would be saying that coal will be there, but mostly without emissions. This policy should take place, of course, where the country has an opportunity. The country can go to the gasification, for example, Almaty coal stations. We try to transfer, we plan to transfer them to gas. This top level processing. And if to mention, it's quite essential and necessary, based on the example of Samruk-Energy or electric station based on coal, in order to comply and correspond to European norms, we need to invest, according to different estimations, of let's say $1 billion. And without ecological payment will be $1 billion per year. So financial means can we attract, but how to pay back? So that's the question about tariff formation. And in this situation, your proposal will be about the suppliers that we have been discussing at the markets. It will be one of the ways to solve this problem. In 2014, we have been discussing this before this market of capacities, because in energy market, that was not there. So the mechanism of this payback, or it will be one buyer, the electro-energy. So all these global questions, it seems to be simple ones, but whatever we invest, or what investor invest, who will pay back? Two ways, government or the consumer. So here, of course, we need to find some sort of golden middle in order to probably to provide some preferences, and that we are discussing with our colleagues together. And as it was mentioned, that in this work, when colleagues do something, probably some additional work should be done, not just punishment like fines and penalties. So probably we need to have some kind of awards and some kind of good things and positive aspects. So probably some quoting or some country support, and we need to take it into consideration. And we are pretty cold country. In northern parts of the country, we have 6 months of central heating. So if we don't have any technologies being improved how to warm up our houses without a coal, just using the solar and wind, we're talking about hydrogen. Well, so far we cannot do it right now. But frankly speaking, these are the questions about the future, and we are at the stage of the beginning, not just us, but the whole world. So I suppose that this is quite positive national report. And of course, not all the ways of solutions are being provided, but it has shown all the problems and challenges. And within the frameworks of KAZENERGY, we will continue this. So thank you so much. And I need to get to another session in a different hall. Yes, thank you so much for your participation. And as the chair of this committee, it emphasizes and underlines the importance of this report, of this. Yeah, thank you so much.
Dear colleagues, at present I would like to transfer to a number of our colleagues from petroleum industry. The first speaker will be Director General of TCO, Mr. Lyon. You probably know that TCO is a major producing asset and exporter of oil in Kazakhstan. One of the first joint ventures that was founded at early stages of our national independence, and we are proud about successes that TCO achieved. Mr. Lyon, you are given the floor, please.
Mr. Ibrashev, thank you very much. Thank you for the opportunity to be a panelist here at the National Energy Report panel. Let me start by saying that at Tengizchevroil, we understand the impact of climate change, and we also appreciate the fact that it requires a global perspective to address the energy transition. That said, and as noted by Mr. Yergin in his comments, oil and gas will continue to be an important part of the Kazakhstan economy going forward, underpinning economic and social development. As part of that, the low-carbon strategy for Kazakhstan, a couple of comments that I'd like to make is in terms of the policy and legislation that will be emerging. We certainly appreciate the consideration of industry input to the policy making. We want to focus on fair and equitable policies and legislation that address all industries across the energy sector and not just focusing on oil and gas. And certainly creating an environment that supports additional investment that we required will be an important part of the low carbon strategy. And for TCO, we would certainly support market-based mechanisms beyond, as opposed to hard mandates from government, as we look to decarbonize and find sustainable solutions that have a direct impact on the decreasing of greenhouse gas emissions. For TCO, our focus is really on Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions. We've already been doing a lot of work in terms of energy efficiency. We'll continue to focus on that. Elimination of routine flaring has been a key area over the past several years, as well as a focus on reduction of fugitive emissions with a number of projects we have underway. As we look forward to incorporating renewables as part of the energy mix at Tengizchevroil and supporting the overall transition here in Kazakhstan. So let me close by saying that it's a pleasure to support the National Energy Report and KAZENERGY, and we stand ready to support practical, cost-effective, and equitable solutions as Kazakhstan's journey to lower carbon proceeds forward. Rahmet, and thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lyon. Now I want to give the floor to Mr. Yermek Marabayev, Deputy Director General of NCOC, NV, which company is the operator of the Kashagan field. Kashagan is a unique oil and gas field in the offshore zone, and Kashagan operations require observation of the most robust rules, standards, global experiences, and environmental requirements. Please, Mr. Marabayev. Thank you very much. First of all, I wanted to express the gratitude to make a speech on behalf of the company NCOC, the operator of Kashagan project. I want to thank participants and those who contributed into the elaboration of the discussed report. That report is informationally saturated. We support it. And today in front of us we have big challenges. To overcome them, we need to unite our efforts. And in connection with that, I would like to discuss three main topics. The first one is, and as was said by Mr. Kevin already, to achieve the planned, the forecasted margins of oil and gas production in the nearest perspective and for remote future, we must have a good dialogue, a good level of collaboration with governmental structures, with regulators and the businesses. Tasks are big. No one has liberated us from our regular responsibility, which is to produce oil and gas, and that responsibility must be upheld not only by producing companies but by the government as well. We must implement all projects in time, in accordance to all technical specifications that were spotted initially to justify the hopes of our shareholders and to improve the investment climate in the Republic of Kazakhstan. Secondly, it is necessary, given modern conditions, to pay attention to non-traditional, unconventional methods of conceptual solutions for development of our fields. For example, in Kashagan today, we are delivering associated gas to a third party. We call it gas evacuation. This is our synergy. Our business versus the business of the others. The gas may now be directed to commercial markets, to some other third parties. So I think that particular example constitutes a good initiative of non-conventional practices that others can follow. We need to find a proper synergy among businesses, among various businesses and the government as well, I emphasize. And the third factor, people, human assets. We can go ahead and plan a lot of things, but at the end of the day, people are the ones who are doing the job and ensuring the proper result. It is now that we need to think how to help our future lieutenants, captains to mature now, how to perfect themselves. This is not a big secret that demographically people that root out from the old Soviet system are retiring. We need to replenish the pool of the petroleum managers. We need time and efforts. We need to breed up the new generation of industry managers who would operate under new reality, who would give oil and gas for the future of Kazakhstan, for safe and secure existence. And concluding my speech, I want to say that we all are capable of working. We all can work, but when we win, it is a collective result. Thank you, Mr. Marabayev. Dear colleagues, we all know Chinese National Petroleum Corporation is an important strategic partner of the Republic of Kazakhstan. The company operates in many projects in our country, including pipeline, transportation, and a number of others. And the corporation is a member of KAZENERGY Association. We always greet the courageous initiatives coming from our Chinese partners. The floor is given to YongHong, President of CNPC in Central Asia. So the request to the speaker to stick to time limitation because we still need time for Q&A. Thank you very much, Mr. Ibrashev. Dear ladies and gentlemen, allow me to greet the participants of this activity and thank organizers for the invitation of myself to make a speech here. The national report gives us the picture of fuel balance in the post-pandemic world, and that also reflects the processes that take part in relation to decarbonization, energy transition, and green economy. We've been working in Kazakhstan since 1997. That is why we deem this report as an important document to receive the full-fledged picture about the investment climate in the country. In 2020, President Tokayev promised that by 2060 the country will reach zero carbon trail, and Kazakhstan has undertook to reduce greenhouse emissions, and that envisages a number of activities and projects to be implemented in 2025 and until 2030. So in China, we have our own plans of operation in those scopes. In April this year, at the Climatic Summit, the leaders of 40 countries have emphasized that China is striving towards low-carbon, clean economy. And in 2030, we are supposed to achieve the neutrality. So in connection with that, CNPC has its own corporate indicators we want to achieve, and we want to dramatically cut emissions by 2025, so to reach total neutrality by 2050. We want to and we do realize that the cutting of emissions is not a telegraphic process. This is a complicated process that requires good coordination of the efforts of all concerned parties and stakeholders. It requires integration of traditional and new sources of energy. According to industrial forecasts, the consumption of oil and gas shall proceed to grow for a long period of time, and the natural gas with low carbon characteristics is of special importance for future economic development. We all know that Kazakhstan are working hard to transfer sources of energy from coal to gas, and Kazakhstan possesses rich gas deposits, and we are promoting cooperation in that field. CNPC promotes joint projects in cooperation with the Republic of Kazakhstan in the sphere of alternative use of natural gas, and those projects start from exploration, production, transportation, refining, marketing, and exports, A to Z, as you can see. And we focused that in the middle-term perspective, Asian and Pacific region shall proceed to consume more oil and gas and will show growing demand in oil and gas. And we think that starting from 2021 and until 2050, the consumption of oil and gas will grow by 1.9%. And oil and gas still remain quite attractive markets in global economy. In Kazakhstan, there is a great number of brownfields. Except of 3 major projects, the annual production from old fields totals 35% of total production in the country. And old fields, I mean brownfields, ensure the supplies of crude oil to Kazakhstan refineries and to abroad, and they satisfy the demand of the country in refined oil products. And the petroleum industry operates stably and is supposed to show further growth. Our company are offering augmentation of cooperation, and we can contribute into such things as elaboration of new tax provisions, sharing of the new technologies and other things to ensure sustained development of old producing fields. Concluding my speech, I wish all participants successes, fruitful activity, new partners, mutual development, and artistic drive that will help us reach our targets. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Lee. Distinguished colleagues, I would like to express the gratitude to all speakers, all the participants of this session. And I think that this topic is really interesting, and the report will be placed and published at the website of the association. We just about 50 copies in Russian we have printed them out. We will distribute them. So during a week, the rest published in printed versions, printed copies in English and in Russian will be sent and delivered to all the state authorities, to our partners, associations, and etc. In the chat of our session, we have some questions, 3 questions. The first one I would like to ask to comment, to answer, Ekaterina. Can you hear me, Ekaterina? Yes. So the question is, well, regarding the questions of possibility of nuclear electric station, atom electric station, all this low carbon development, is it necessary to do, or is there any other alternative? Well, I would like to propose to focus on the approved technologies, and it is obvious and necessary for Kazakhstan to replace the coal existence nowadays. So 2020 was important not from the position of pandemic that had a great impact on the economies of different countries, but it was really important for energy, the role of which was accepted and recognized by the International Agency and European Commission as one of the leading tools, critical tools to that the nuclear atomic energy has become the part of green direction, one of the basis and foundation of economies around the world. Let's say Kazakhstan at this stage has the choice, to choose the technology that had been checked. So we are at this, nowadays we have effective and active work with the third generation, one of which can be observed in Russia, neighboring country, and it is obvious that we have some concerns regarding the emergency and accident in Chernobyl. It was a generation 2 of those reactors, and Semipalatinsk accident as well. But we are at the new technological level of development. I would like to emphasize and underline the only sufficient and approved source of the energy. Thank you, Ekaterina. Thank you. Very good answer. And I would like to ask Mr. Matthew, could you please answer? Can you hear me?
I have
The first question, please, could you comment the forecast regarding gas and Kazakhstan turning it into net importer of gas? And the second question, and there is a second question.
Questions.
So the question number 2, what are the potential threats for Kazakhstan regarding export of Kazakhstan, this carbon tax and SEEPX mechanism?
Excellent question, all, and I think very timely in terms of the overall topic. Let me take this opportunity to basically thank our sponsors for their support. We really appreciate it as we have done our research. And also, I really like the words of Mr. Marabayev. It's a collective result. I want to thank all those who have also participated in doing this. But to answer the more specific question on Kazakhstan's long-term gas picture, of course, this is not a foregone conclusion. But nonetheless, what we see happening is a combination of gasification that drives up demand inside of Kazakhstan. It seems to me like this is a very likely development, in combination with a very flat commercial gas profile. Each time that we've done our overall hydrocarbon forecast, the amount of oil that we see being produced in the country comes down. And of course, because it's a byproduct, it also comes down as well. And those two lines basically cross sometime in the mid-2040s. And this is very different from, let's say, for example, the first report, where we did see Kazakhstan remaining a net gas exporter throughout the forecast period. This time we see it basically dipping the other way in the 2040s. In terms of the second question about Europe's CBAM, at the moment, we have to say that the CBAM in Europe, after a lot of talk, ends up actually being kind of CBM light. It ends up not even addressing fuels, but basically only a handful of manufactured sectors. These are not, big exporters for Kazakhstan. I think everyone is more concerned about the threat of what happens as this mechanism rolls out, as it becomes bigger. And again, I basically don't see this as a big threat longer term. And the reason is because even if it does expand to include fuels, Kazakhstan has a variety of mechanisms that it can do to basically obviate the need for it. It already has an export tax that exists. One of the things it can do is basically call this an export carbon duty if it wants to. And basically it can basically levy kind of the same kind of amount that Europe is talking about, and that way you don't have to pay double taxation. This is also part of the arrangement that works within the WTO as well. So I think Kazakhstan has a variety of ways of obviating or softening the impact of CBAM, but this is going to be a very important part of the overall global picture, is regulation of carbon, and then also kind of working within these cross-border mechanisms. But there's a variety of ways of dealing with it, and I don't think that it's going to dramatically impact Kazakhstan's future. Let me turn it back over to you, Mr. Ibrashev.
Спасибо. Спасибо.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your informative answer. Distinguished colleagues, our time is unfortunately running out of time, and I hope that you like this session, and especially this National Energy Report. The great job was done behind it. The great big number of people worked on this, experts. So I really hope that this report will be useful for businesses, for our members of association, for governmental authorities, state authorities, and for further work on this important agenda. Thank you so much, and have a good evening.